Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar on unmanned aerial systems. My name is Caitlin Friesman, and I will help moderate this webinar and assist with questions and answers. Also on the line is James Gray of FHWA, the EDC-5 National Team Lead for UAS, Paul Rogers, the Principal at KPR Engineering, and Basil Yap, Program Manager for the North Carolina DOT Aviation Division's UAS program. The implementation of UAS by transportation agencies allows for increased safety and efficiency while saving time and money for taxpayers. The purpose of this webinar is to provide our partners with the latest technological advancements when using unmanned aerial systems, specifically for construction applications. As such, the bulk of today's presentation will be given by our North Carolina-based subject matter experts, Paul and Basil. They will also discuss the collaboration between agencies and private consultants and how that relationship has worked for the North Carolina DOT. This webinar is sponsored by the FHWA, whose mission it is to serve our transportation agencies, state DOTs, locals, tribal nations, and federal land management agencies. So as we begin, a few housekeeping items. First, this webinar is being recorded so that it may be posted on our website and replayed later. And during this presentation, we ask that you type any questions that you may have for the presenters into the chat pod. We will answer all questions at the end of the presentation. So before we turn it over to our subject matter experts, just a little bit of background information about this webinar and the webinar series that have been ongoing. So as you are participating in this webinar, you are probably already aware of what unmanned aerial systems are, but it's another term for drones. So these are multi-use aircraft that are controlled from a licensed operator. And often these devices are coupled with sensors and other technology that implements multiple different benefits. And so what are these used for? They fall into three main categories when it comes to the EDC-5 background information. And so those fall under structural inspection, construction inspection, and emergency response. And there are several use cases that fall within those three categories, some of which we'll be talking about today. So the tech briefs were developed as part of the EDC-5 efforts, and as a part of those, there are also accompanying webinars. We held our first webinar in April that covered emergency management of flooding, and that is posted on the website that is on the sidebar on this webinar. And then we have UAS for construction inspection that is being held right now, and we will have two more webinars that are coming up covering surveying and bridge inspection. And the presentations on these topics can be found at the website that's linked there. This also includes other presentations on use cases that were covered at summits that were held late last year. So now I'll go ahead and hand it over to our subject matter experts, Paul and Basil, and they will discuss UAS for construction applications.
Welcome and good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the U.S. This is Basil Yap, UAS Program Manager for North Carolina Department of Transportation, and joining me is Paul Rogers. Hello. So we have some slides ready to share here. We've put together some slides today to talk about construction inspection and how we can use drones to help with that function and that role. And so we'll cover those topics. If you have questions, we'll make sure that we'll try to get those at the end, of course, but we have also the window up here that shows any questions that you would post in the comment section for everybody to be able to see those and address those as well. So we'll dive right in.
In North Carolina, construction inspection is handled both in-house and through contracted inspection companies and engineering companies. Both parties in North Carolina right now are using UAVs, UAS for their work in a bunch of different aspects. When we think about UAVs, most folks that I run into find that it's kind of a daunting acronym zoo that they can't really decide whether or not it's something they want to get into. They think it's going to be too much of a hassle. So as highway professionals, we've got a lot of different tools. And all of these technologies require training and they require, practice to implementation, but each one of them enhances what we do, allows us to provide a better level of service, and also it usually helps us do things a little bit more efficiently. So something Caitlin touched on a little bit, why do we want UASs in our arsenal? Increase inspection efficiency, increase effectiveness, lower the cost, and one of the big ones we are seeing more and more is improving safety. For my team, and this is pretty common across North Carolina, we generally do operations in a two-man team. We have airband radios, we have all the VFR maps, and all the safety gear you'd have on a regular construction site. In terms of data, there's a lot of different things that we do. Most of the platforms we have 4K video capabilities, and they also do high-resolution photos. Honestly, there's really no good answer to which is better. Each inspection type, each inspector may prefer one or the other, and it's very good sometimes to be able to have both at your disposal. So a couple of features that we look for, and this is an ever-changing field here. Sensor size, and that's the actual sensor of the UAV, not necessarily the megapixels. Obstacle avoidance. Wide-angle lenses are really good for those close-up inspections and getting perspective. Adjustable focal lengths. This is something that's becoming a little bit cheaper to find on UAVs, and this allows us to zoom in and see things in greater detail. I've said battery time, battery life, battery time. I call it battery time because the size of the battery is irrelevant. It's how long the UAV will fly. And depending on your mission, you may need really extended flight times. A top-mounted camera, something we don't think about a lot. We need to be able to see up if we're underneath something. And then thermal cameras, which are coming down in price every day, can be quite useful for a lot of applications. Just a quick note on the resolution versus sensor size, something that often gets overlooked. A sensor that is bigger with the same megapixels as a sensor that's smaller is likely more complex. It's going to have greater detail, greater definition. So if you're out shopping for a UAV, don't necessarily look at 20 megapixels versus 22 megapixels. Look at the details of the sensor, and you may find that you'll find more usable data. The operations that we have here in North Carolina, most of them fall in the rotary craft category. There are a few fixed wings applications. Those are generally used in orthographic type work, but most of them are the typical helicopter style. Some comments on size here. Everybody thinks about the DJI Phantom as the UAV. Reality is that these things have been around a long time, and they're all over the place in terms of size and capability. This one here, 131-foot wingspan. If you've never seen one in person, I'd recommend it at an air show or something. It's quite impressive. Another one, this is a small gasoline or fuel-powered UAV, and it flew across the Atlantic in 38 hours. So try not to put everything we think about in terms of UAVs, UASs, in terms of the DJI iconic Phantom. Size here, this is a DJI Spark. Fits in the palm of your hand. It's about 400 bucks. This is probably the low end of what I see somebody trying to do anything with. The high end is things like the Lockheed Martin. Current price, I'm not sure. Last time I was quoted around 40,000 bucks. The Intel Topcon model there with the camera, probably going to look at about 25 grand. And these are with base model sensors. This isn't thermal or anything special. Most of the folks that I run into in North Carolina doing this work have a UAV within the $1,000 to $10,000 range. A couple of popular ones there, the Unique and the DJI Inspired. A couple of other smaller popular ones are the DJI Phantom and the Mavic. And less popular, but definitely worth a mention, in the Parrot and Autel UAVs. Parrot is one of the few companies that is not a Chinese-based company. For some folks, that makes a big deal. Autel is a Chinese-based parent company, but they are based out of Washington State for their U.S. operations. We'll jump right in here to construction inspection. I'll let Basil take over.
So we have it kind of split into 4 different sections here that we'll go through. And the first thing we'll look at is how we can use drones for erosion control. It's one of the use cases that we currently have NCDOT employees using drones to help monitor our erosion control measures on job sites, or really any other uh, stormwater ponds that we have. And it's important. This is really a kind of a use case that if you're just getting started using a drone within your consulting civil engineering consulting firm or your Department of Transportation with some off the shelf drones as well as some straightforward training, you could dive in and start using this. So relatively uncomplicated. But we do obviously take stormwater and erosion control very seriously here in the state. When I worked, before in this role, I worked in a residence office and oversaw a lot of construction sites. And certainly each day we're making sure that the erosion control measures were holding up as they were designed, especially during the afternoon showers that we often get here in North Carolina and the southeastern part of the state. So the erosion controls measures are permitted by the NCDOT, and so we just want to make sure that a contractor who has put those in place has properly placed them, and then we can document them. And they're of course maintained over the life of the project, which could go anywhere from one summer to multiple years. And so within North Carolina DOT, our roadside environmental office is going to be looking at those, as well as our division construction office. Now, what drone will we use for this, and what are some of the key components? As mentioned before, wide-angle lens is going to be very helpful. Battery time, and then obstacle avoidance. You're going to be flying, of course, near vegetation often, at least that's been the case in North Carolina, where we'll have these, and you'll see that in our videos coming up. The use of drones for this, we're trying to increase productivity and increase inspection quality. So how do we increase productivity? Well, we're able to use drones to access an entire job site much quicker than either by foot, or if it's after a storm, we're able to access that without walking through mud or getting stuck. So we can quickly scan long distances of silt fence and be able to document that either through video or photo, and to keep it on file. And of course, once you find an issue, it's very easy to take a photo and quickly send an email saying, please address this. And again, while we can do that from the ground, often with a cell phone, it's just really covering a large distance quickly. And then once there's a storm event, if we're hindered, we can use a drone to access. So just a variety of different inspection needs here: silt fence, BMP features, retention facilities, and then of course the permanent stormwater management once that's installed and the road is back open. So looking at silt fence, this probably is pretty familiar to a lot of you on the specifications on most job sites. We're looking, again, a large area. We're able to quickly document, is this silt fence installed properly? Is it holding up? Has a tree branch fell over it? Just ensuring the quality of the product that's in place. So here's a photo here of some silt fence. This next one is a video. One of the conversations Paul and I were having before this, while I was watching this video, and I was saying, well, I would just simply, take a photo versus taking a video of this entire thing. And Paul's comment was, taking a video captures multiple perspectives of the same location, and that's quite true. So you can see some vegetation hanging over here. This is why it's important to have some obstacle avoidance built into your drone. Of course, as a drone pilot, you're responsible for not running into things like trees. But the obstacle avoidance certainly is gonna help you out and give you help you gauge the distance you are from that particular obstacle. So again, for those that are out in the field, probably very familiar with BMP features, common things you'll see on your construction plans. And so these are just some of the things you're going to be looking for. Here's a photo again. We can see potentially this is not holding up. Obviously, the tree branch is fell over it here. But the area around it that's muddy, we can quickly get out and document it. Looks like we've got some water leaving the site here. These are from North Carolina DOT jobs that we have. So some of the uses that we already have in place now. Again, retention facilities, making sure that the sediment is settling, then draining the water out. So we've set it up on a schedule where we've documented these, flown them once a month, and then after a rain event, we'll fly them as well. This is a video here of, you can see retention pond in here, as well as quite a few different measures in place that we could inspect within this video or document. This is after a storm event. So then once we have our permanent stormwater devices in place, so say during the life of the project, before the pipe gets covered up and we're flying these job sites routinely, we're able to capture where the of course, which catch basins are in based on what date the photo was taken or the video was taken. If there's pipe on site, you can count the pipe, or you can see what pipe has been installed. And then, if it hasn't been covered up, again, you just have a documentation of that in place. And if you create an ortho photo, you can have a document that you can overlay over your plans, and that'll help with your as-built drawings as well. So this is monitoring it's actually documenting a residential subdivision, which we were going to then take over the road. It was after it was installed, the road was in place. The DOT would take over this right away here and maintenance. So just documenting it. All right. So another use. I know there's going to be a specific webinar, or there was a specific focus mentioned earlier around structural inspection. And so what we're talking about here is within the construction during the life of the project, not for maintenance. Some great uses around maintenance, but that'll be probably covered in a different webinar. Again, some key features that you want to see in your drone. Sensor size is going to be key here because the ability, of course, to capture high resolution images and good quality images will be very helpful. Obstacle avoidance, again, if you're flying near an object or under a bridge. So we'll just dive right in here. We're going to cover a couple things: bridges, towers, and other vertical construction. For example, the rest stops that we help build within our state. So we'll talk here bridges, looking at quite a few different things: concrete segregation, shear stud placement, bolted connections, puddle wells, bracing, and then scouring around the bridge as well. So this is a job site we have in North Carolina. 14770 is in Durham, and so we've been flying this project. This project's been going on for about 2 years now, and we've been flying it once. We try to fly it once a month for the entire life of the project. And again, anytime something is completed, we come fly it. So we fly these structures here. And in this case, we're just simply documenting and taking pictures of after the steel has been erected. And again, we can share these with the engineers that are monitoring this project. Or if we were out there with the structural engineer or engineers, we could then live stream as we were looking at these particular joists and they could, instead of getting a cherry picker up there to take a look at it, we could use the drone, essentially cover more area quicker without having, and um, you know, reducing the cost of getting that additional equipment out in the field. This is a video of a bridge. This is NC-12. A hurricane came through here a couple of years ago, washed out the road. So they set up this temporary bridge, which you see in place. And while they were building a bridge in place just to ensure there was no future washout, this bridge is now open. But again, NC-12 on our coast. So this is during the construction process. It's not always looking for, just not. It's just not internal folks that are looking at these videos. We're also sharing these externally as well. So we're sharing it with our external partners, whether it's tourism or others, just so they're updated on how the progress of the project is, because NC-12 is on the Outer Banks. A lot of money that is going through this area, and then with the public that lives on the Outer Banks as well. So it's a great tool for them to keep them updated. So we'll jump into towers here. Done quite a few different towers. These are around our airports, the beacon lights, and so this could be duplicated into high mast towers, overhead signs, which we've also done testing on using zoom cameras. So we'll just go over a couple of these to get the ideas and thoughts flowing around how you can use this for tower inspection. Similar to other structures, we're looking at the connections. That's where your failure points often are. Whether you're on the coast or inland, and over time you're looking at coating conditions. How's it holding up before you want to have someone climb up some of these towers? You want to make sure that the connections are not rusted out, so that the person climbing finds out that that room's rusted out, etc. So again, we talked about enhancing safety. So before we would paint these, we use the drone to do a quick inspection. So this is a beacon light at an airport here. If you're flying at an airport, there are precautions that you would need to have in place. This is a general aviation airport. And so you would just want to make sure you're coordinating with the airport manager so that they're aware you're flying. And of course, you want to, obviously, we're very close to this tower here while we're flying, but you wouldn't want to be flying over a runway without monitoring traffic. Paul mentioned earlier airband radio. That's just having a radio that has the same frequency as the pilots that they're flying, so that you can understand when they would be flying in. Helicopter traffic often doesn't use the same kind of procedures to flying in on the runway, so being able to use that airband radio to monitor air traffic, and that'll be something you would learn as you would get your license, your Part 107 license, to be able to fly. All right, again, then vertical construction. Not a lot of vertical construction that we do within North Carolina DOT, but again, as we think about construction broadly, there are some great use cases here as well. We've often used drones to fly within enclosed areas. So not just externally. When you're flying in enclosed areas, of course, you want to make sure you have the feature we mentioned earlier, obstacle avoidance, that'll help you, because often there's no GPS that really kind of helps keep your drone in a stable position. But similar to bridges and towers, you're looking at connections and other things that would traditionally require a ladder or a cherry picker or some other device, a snooper truck, that could be cost prohibitive. And so you're able to reduce that cost. You're also to be able to not put people in danger and use a drone to make those to do those inspections. And we also would use it to just monitor progress. So here's a rest stop in North Carolina, and so we would go out and fly this every so often. As you'll see it start to change here. Again, a great tool to kind of document. You could either share this with external folks, but then a great document internally. You have timestamps, date, video or photos. So we'll just keep moving. Spoiler alert, it does get built and open. So, all right, so we'll jump to the last two things we'll address here: maintenance and construction projects.
So a big part of DOT's budget is maintenance of roadways, airports, and other DOT property. When considering a UAV for this type of work, most often, again, that wide angle lens is helpful for looking at things in perspective. Adjustable focal length, again, we talked about that, but trying to get close to objects without really getting close to them, probably a good feature to have. And the thermal camera is where this starts to really be useful in our experience, looking at surface treatments and asphalt. Again, the same thing we find here with any of the other parts of construction inspection. We're looking to save time, save money, and create a better product. Right now, we're doing a few areas in North Carolina, surface treatment inspections, some thermal energy special cases, pavement marking inspection. We're also doing inspection training, and we're also collecting data for safety assessments for the residents. On surface treatments, what we can do is we can look for consistency in the application. Sometimes surface treatments are on a single lane road, sometimes they're on a larger multi-lane road, or even on an airport. It can become difficult to see down on top of these areas without being in the middle of the construction or having to walk through, ride on a piece of equipment. We can also look at things like traffic control and other things that are going on around the surface treatments. This is a chip seal here in North Carolina, a pretty common sight through the construction season. These things move fast. Most of you probably experienced with them. It is an operation that is hard to keep tabs on, and everything needs to be done properly, where you start to get a pretty poor job and loss of aggregate, bleeding, all kinds of other issues that make it almost not worth doing the maintenance at all. On airports, we're doing a lot of different types of sealers. This one here is a rejuvenator product. The GA airports don't see a lot of structural issues. They like to have oxidation damage only. So we're trying to combat that with rejuvenator products on some airports. We can get down and see these things from above instead of trying to see them from the ground, get a better perspective. Again, another picture there of the chip seal. On the right side, we can see a little closer picture of the action. And in this photo, we can see a couple issues. So this road is open to the public. We've got a truck who's parking in the lane. It's going to make it difficult for cars to pass safely by. We've got a hopper that's not full. And so the hopper's not full, the conveyor belt's not full, the box is not full, and now we've got a section in the middle of the road that's not going to have enough aggregate on it. Thermal imaging, caution you a little bit on thermal cameras. They're kind of in their infancy for UAVs. The quality of image you get, the price is very, very high price right now. We hope that's going to come down. It looks like that there's been a lot of movement downward in the pricing for thermal cameras. But before you go out and spend 50 grand on the best thermal camera, realize that camera's probably going to be 20 grand next year. So some of the things that we found helpful looking at that thermal segregation in a couple of different areas. We've got chip seals and surface treatments, and then also another one we spent a lot of money on the state. We've got 72 publicly maintained airports. Spent a lot of money on airport paint. We can see the differences in the paint thicknesses because we have two dissimilar materials at two different temperatures, and as they go down, they're going to come to the same temperature. And as we see those differences, we know we got a difference in application rate. Pavement markings, another one that kind of gets overlooked. And my crew, we do a number of pavement marking testing things. We do reflectivity, We do material testing and all that type of stuff. But it's really a pretty small group of people in our state that do it, partially because it's something that's done at the end of the project. We're trying to rush out. And sometimes having a UAV to fly over the project, you can get a little different perspective and make sure things are put down right. This is really important on the airports that we do because the perspective of the pilot is not sitting on the ground. A couple images here from recent airport projects. And here's some video of some markings. Going down here, we can see the application process. So all this paint, if you look across there, it's wet. And we've got moving equipment. Sometimes it's difficult to do something, to look at things closely without being in the middle of it. And we also get a little bit different perspective here. There's a finished paint job. And this is another use case on the highway side for markings. We're getting a lot more of these unconventional intersections in North Carolina. I know they're popping up in other states as well. Something we can do is verify that our marking layout on these unconventional intersections are functioning as intended. As a PE, I hate to not fully vet every new technology, whether that's an intersection or a new geotextile or something else on the market before it's turned over 100% to the public. And so with this type of record, we can make sure that the cars are understanding where they're going. Do we need to add additional markings? The markings we have legible and all the rest.
You could also use that when we're looking at intersections like that to just monitor, or sorry, to share with the public. We found those are useful so that the public is aware of what this new intersection that they've never heard of is coming to their community. So you can show videos like that to helpful.
One of the areas that we're really starting to pick up traction on is inspection training. We've all probably watched a video produced by most time private entities that are trying to do some training. DOTs in-house have done some. I'm familiar with a couple different DOTs, but the UAV allows us to create very tailored, very specific training videos and share those with our inspectors and even share those with the contractors. And the ultimate goal here is to improve the quality of what we're doing. So here is some B-roll from the training video that's being produced by one of the other units in DOT, and this is going to be used to train all of their chip seal inspectors. It seems like they try to combat it with getting in private parties, but the reality is that people that know how to do this inspection are retiring quicker than they can replace them, and the quality of the work is suffering as a result. So now we can train people in real time, basically collect the video one day, show them what went wrong, and the next day they can make adjustments. This provides a unique perspective we can't get from standing on the ground with a camera. It doesn't matter how nice the camera is, we can't see this in the same perspective. A little bit more of the process here. There's a little bit more of that B-roll. So, all right, job site safety. This is kind of a byproduct of the rest of the things we do, but it's also becoming a little bit more mainstream. We can document all kinds of safety issues. One of the big ones is all routes and safety of the actual lane shifts, the lane closures, all that. And very quickly we can document what's going right, what's going wrong. We can share it with the people that are in charge and say, hey, look, we've got a hot spot here. We need to do something about it. And we can make quick changes that will probably ultimately save lives if we do not have traffic behaving erratically. Here's a picture of a bridge here that we did a safety assessment on. Here's a little bit of video that goes with it. So the primary goal of this one, we're not going to show you the ones that are the worst ones out there, but this is primary goal of this is to make sure that this lane shift is operating smoothly. I believe this is I-95. Is that correct, Basil? And so we want to make sure that folks coming from New York and Miami aren't seeing something that they're not expecting, and we end up with a fatal truck accident or somebody making a last-minute irrational maneuver and creating a pileup that closes the interstate for half a day.
Often when you have construction going on in the median, like in this particular case, you can see it's built and there's a lot of traffic on the median. And so if you're hauling in, Paul mentioned the haul routes, and that's where we've seen a lot of the traffic incidences is when we have slow moving trucks that are loaded up and now they're merging into traffic. And if traffic is at 55 miles an hour, do they have enough space to get up to speed, or do they cause an incident? And sometimes the plans, they have the traffic control set up for the plans, but there needs to be some modification made. And so this is kind of a unique perspective. And we've been called multiple times to respond to incidences like this, where we have to go out and document and monitor from the sky an area that is now of concern. So construction progress. Again, sensor size, wide angle lens, adjustable focal length, some of the key requirements that we're looking at here. When we're looking at construction projects as someone who is as an inspector or an engineer over the project, you're administering funds, validating that the job site or the construction is progressing as the schedule. If there's any hiccups or milestones that are not met, you want to be able to document those. And you're verifying that the invoices that you're receiving and the material that's being billed is accurate. And so we're looking at how can we use a drone to help with that and monitor the construction progress. I'll quickly address one of the questions that someone asked about, are there any FAA waivers that we are using to perform this work? And we have a night waiver in place, which we do use occasionally at night, but most of the time we're flying during the day. Most of the time the folks are out there, but sometimes at night to monitor traffic. We've used that night waiver, and then during any kind of like natural disaster response, like Hurricane Florence last year, we've been able to get waivers to fly, beyond visual line of sight, etc., as needed for our mission. The project verification, again, a picture or video, if it gets to court, speaks volumes. So that's, again, a unique perspective. We've mentioned that multiple times here by using the drone to capture the progress.
Yeah, something that is a touchy subject is the liquidated damages. And lots of contracts all over the state and all over the nation have liquidated damages. And before you go to assess liquidated damages, it's really good to have both, document proof and actual video from the UAVs. Actually, really nice video and photo evidence. Because there's always, and I've been through a number of these where there's always an excuse of why something's not done on time. If you have the video that shows that, hey, we weren't working on a clear day, it's not a rain day, or whatever the issue is, it's going to make the process a whole lot smoother.
So the photo you would see on the far right-hand side there, an ortho photo that was put together of a job site. And again, so if this is timestamped to Paul's point, and liquidated damages are being assessed, and the conversations are around how many rain days there are, or other delays that were in place, coming back and looking at something like this photo and saying, well, you had this pipe here, or this is where you were at this particular day, just helps with that that process. And fortunately, I've been through liquidated damages as managing a couple different projects. So this was before though we had the drone program up and running. This is a site that we often fly. Again, multiple sites throughout the state, and so we're assessing the progress on this particular job site. Lots of different things. Again, as I mentioned before, you can see help verify if the project is progressing. And again, I know I mentioned this before, sharing it with your leadership, so not just the division offices, but if things get elevated and you have a state representative calling or a state legislator calling, asking about something, this also helps speak volumes or helps support your case. Ortho mosaics, I think, will probably be covered in more detail when we get to when they have the surveying webinar. So we'll keep it high level, but a lot of what we've shown you up until this point is not an ortho mosaic. So ortho mosaics are multiple photos that are stitched together to create, essentially a larger photo. What you see when you're using Google Maps, whether it's satellite photos or other photos taken from planes, they're images that are stitched together. A wider area often can be geo-referenced, and if there are some measures in place for accuracy, you can then take measurements from them. In this particular case, we were using them again just to document a job site.
With this ortho mosaic, not on a survey application, but from a construction inspection application, we can create a file that captures the entire site at a particular point in time. We can verify anything along with construction progress. We can see what materials are on site. We can do a lot of different things with the mosaic, and they're pretty quick to get. So,
yeah, and without getting too far off topic, we've done vegetation classification, all kinds of different things with these ortho mosaics. So what you're seeing on the top right-hand corner is a typical layout that you would a flight plan for your drone that would fly back and forth taking photos. These applications are very easy to use, pretty intuitive, and you kind of create the area that you want to cover with existing satellite imagery that usually is uploaded to your drone or the device that you're using to map, whether that's Pix4D, Drone Deploy, or a variety of other applications. And then that drone's going to fly back and forth taking photos, nadir photos, which is a photo straight down, and you're going to have overlap in your photos. About 80% overlap is what we're seeing. So your photos overlap by 80%. You'll have multiple points within each photo that's going to line up, and that's how you create an ortho photo, and you can stitch, which is what you see the product there at the bottom right-hand corner. Great for as-builts. Once a project's completed, documenting the entire site. We've also seen this in pre-construction, going out and they will spray utilities. So the utility folks will come out, mark the ground, and the ground is easily visible from the drone. And so then if your ortho mosaic is to a certain accuracy standard, you can then just throw that into some plans, and you can put utility on your design plan as well. Again, material verification. We mentioned this earlier, but we'll just reconfirm. A lot of data that you can pull from these photos.
So wrapping up here, I don't know how many folks in the audience already have the 107, but if you don't, it's really not a big deal to get it. There are a lot of guides out there. You probably don't have to even hire somebody to train you. There's enough free literature. NCDOT even has a study guide for theirs that's very similar to the federal one. Go ahead and get that done. And I personally think you start with an affordable UAV, a UAS. Get it into the hands of yourself if you're an inspector, or your staff if they're inspecting, and let them start to determine how they're going to best use it. Let them augment their existing work. It's kind of like the first time we got a digital camera on site. It changed things, but it wasn't something that had to come from top down. That's kind of the approach that Basil's group here inside of NCDOT is. when they're trying to get these things into the field, into different divisions, provide the training they need, allow them to use them the best suits their needs. So
there's just this next slide that we have here just illustrates there's lots of different rules out there. And just be aware of those. We don't need to dive into these, but they're constantly evolving and changing. And so once you become a pilot, you'll be aware of these rules, and just always good to be aware of any changes that there are. There are certain limitations that are built in right now to protect, of course, aircraft flying in the sky, folks on the ground as this technology matures. And so before we open up for a Q&A, I'll just kind of wrap back up to some of the previous comments that we made at the beginning around the role of both state employees that are providing construction inspection services, as well as consultants or contractors like Paul Rogers and KPR. So in North Carolina DOT, we put out an LSC limited service contract to hire firms to help us specifically look at how we can use drones and start supporting our missions internally. So we have within North Carolina DOT internal pilots, about 25 pilots internal to our Department of Transportation is flying. But most, about half of our inspectors out in the field are contracted. We have so much work out there now. And so those folks that are already out in the field for the construction, engineering, and inspection services are starting to utilize drones as well. And so what we're trying to do is we want to figure out the use cases, develop the best practices, and then share those with folks internally or externally that are contracted with the DOT, or folks like, through this webinar, folks like you guys. So there's beginning to be more and more opportunities. We're going to see more RFQs for drone services, not just within our state, but other states as well. And a lot of the firms that we're hiring are not just drone specific. There are existing engineering firms that have that expertise, like Paul and KPR, but he is, his group has begun to use drones to help with their specific mission. So that's most of the contractors that we've been pulling in under our limited service contract.
And to add on what Basil was talking about, I grew up with a hobby of photography. That's probably why I ended up adopting UAS systems. Probably it's been 5 years at this point. But I'm an inspector. That's my day job. I'm not a UAV guy. So when I see folks out on job sites, I want to see inspectors who have become capable of using the UAV, the UAS platform. And there's really a whole lot of different ones out there. We've got some UAVs now that are able to go underground and find their way. Got cages around them. This is going to be part of our everyday inspection toolkit. And so I think it's important if you're private industry or your DOT, it just starts to become part of your toolkit and not thought of as something that has to be done in a separate department. Now, that being said, in North Carolina, they wouldn't be where they are without Basil and his group that are basically a separate department, helping train, help bring these guys up to speed, and really promoting this tool to be used in a lot of different ways.
So we'll jump into the questions. Just looking through the questions here, a gentleman, Brandon Webb, asked, has NC instituted its Kitty Hawk administration software yet? So what he's referring to there is Kitty Hawk, while also the location of the first flight by the Wright brothers, first powered flight in North Carolina, is also a software suite that helps with drone fleet management and mission management. So our North Carolina DOT UAS policy requires anyone who's flying drones for the DOT to monitor or to turn in their hours, how many hours they've flown, locations, etc. That helps us understand how many folks or how many missions we have going on, and where folks are flying, make sure it's done safely and, of course, legally. So we've talked with this particular company, Kitty Hawk. And so to answer your question, we have not instituted it yet. We're still going through we actually just recently went through a wide variety of software privacy threshold analysis, which, if you guys are following, the Department of Homeland Security put a UAS industry alert out saying that there were some privacy concerns around Chinese manufactured drones. And so what we've done is we've gone back and done privacy analysis on all these different platforms. So we hope to have Kitty Hawk up and running now. We did use Kitty Hawk for a little while, but a fleet management software is going to be key to any group growing a fleet of drones to monitor the health of the aircraft, where folks are flying, and who's flying, and the permissions they have. Any other questions that we have?
Yes, if you have any questions, type that in the chat pod there on the bottom left of your screen. And to give you guys a few minutes to type any questions you may have, just to go over the slide on the screen, here's some contact information. So you have the email addresses of Paul and Basil there if you have questions that are specific to the presentation that they gave. If you have any questions about implementing a UAS program or the EDC-5 initiative, those can be directed towards James Gray, and his contact information is there. And if you have any questions on this webinar, future webinars, or the materials, those can be directed towards myself, and my email address is there. So I think we have a few more questions that have come in, Basil, if you want to address those.
Are you willing to share privacy analysis of different UAS platforms? Yep. We certainly, once those are completed, can talk about that, what that process looks like and what we do for privacy analysis. There's some risk analysis documents that they already out that can be shared, publicly available, that can be shared, but certainly if you email me directly, we can do that conversation.
And then there was a previous question of, can the sensors be used to identify groundwater sources?
So what we have seen contractors use drones and thermal cameras within our state to try to find changes in soil, and of course that was usually an indication of moisture in the soil, moisture content. These particular missions that were flown were around pipes that were leaking, so were they able to kind of find where pipe was leaking, but not, yeah. So we've also been using drones in a research capacity, working with NC State to try to figure out where wetlands start and stop, so wetland delineation. Again, using a thermal camera, as well as some classification of plant species, try to figure out where the ground moisture content is based on thermal imaging. So hopefully that answers your question.
The biggest drawback I see to the thermal stuff right now is relative expense of the sensors compared to the product you get. The pixel density of even the cheapest UAV for a visual light camera is just immensely larger than it is for thermal cameras, and I don't really understand why the thermal cameras, the handheld thermal cameras, are significantly cheaper. I own a number of clear handhelds that do a whole lot better than the much more expensive UAV counterparts. So hopefully that's going to change, and that will open up that market.
All right, are there any other questions from the participants? To give another minute to see if any come, a few last comments. That blue link on the left there is where you'll find this webinar posted probably in a week or two, as well as our previous webinar that was on emergency management after flooding. And there's also some other slides there. Also, as the presenters mentioned, we know that there was some lag in the videos here, which unfortunately is just some of the technology restrictions that we had. And so if you go back and see this webinar after the fact, we'll have those videos cleaned up. So if you did want to see any of those videos in more detail, those will be posted on the website as well. So it looks like we don't have any more questions coming in, and we're wrapping up right on time here. So thank you, Paul and Basil, for this presentation, and to all of our participants for joining in today.